Now I am pleased to introduce Dr. Omar Grabe. He's the Senior Vice Provost, and he is going to say a few words about the Presidential Teaching Professorship, and he's also going to introduce our speaker. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Grabe.
All right, good afternoon. And actually, whenever I hear the word Senior Vice Provost, I say, what? Something. Yeah, something like that. The young Vice Provost, maybe. Something like
Youthful.
Youthful, yes. Well, I'm excited to be here for two reasons. First of all, the Presidential Teaching Professorship Award recipients, they are special. And that is the highest award any faculty member can ever get. And I'll talk more about it. That's reason number one. Reason number two, I'm going to introduce a friend that I got to know virtually for the last, 2 years? 2 years. And today actually was the first day, although we've been working here for God knows how long, we never met in person. So today is the first time we ever met in person. So I'm excited for that. All right. So it is my pleasure to be here today. But let me talk more about the PTP, the Presidential Teaching Professorship Award. As I said, it is the highest honor any faculty member can get. The award was established in 1991, so for so many years, and we awarded so many awards. And each year we award 2 or 3, depending on the pool of applicants. Then we decide either 2 or 3. There's a committee, and the committee is made of past recipients of the same award. And actually it is very, very involved process. We get feedback not only from peers, from other faculty members, but also we survey students. So it is really very involved. That's why I say it is one of the highest honors any faculty member can get. So the recipients are considered an outstanding teachers, not only by their peers, but also by students. So as you know, I've been chairing that committee or participating in that committee since I became the vice provost for the last 3 years, and just looking at these applications, they are touching. I mean, just learning about what those recipients are doing to their students, it is truly touching. They go beyond the call for duty. They go beyond what I, because I'm myself a faculty member, they go beyond, and I always thought I'm a passionate faculty member, but look at their applications, I said, what? I did not do that. So truly they give their time generously beyond the classroom to help students. Actually last year, one of the recipients, she would stay until 6, 7, 8, so it's open office hours, it's not 1 hour. And if you come, you get served. If you're not coming, you're not. No. And no, if no one comes, guess what? She used to go and walk around and look for students who need help. So that is the type of recipient
I don't do that.
of this award. So each fall and spring, we invite one PTP award recipient to share his or her teaching experience and expertise with the general audience. For almost 20 years, the Center for Innovative Teaching, and that's a new name, that's why we're getting used to it. Innovative Teaching and Learning has been coordinating those seminars for the Provost Office. So let me take the opportunity to thank the staff members for coordinating this. Yvonne Johnson, Jen Howard, and Mike Strunk for your effort in organizing this event. So now let me introduce my friend, Professor, or I should say distinguished Professor Taylor Atkins. He's the presenter today. Dr. Atkins is a professor in the Department of History at NIU, and he's also, and that's how we got to know each other, he's also the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and holds the title of Distinguished Teaching Professor. He's a historian, and I admire historians. I admire history. I read a lot of history myself. Actually, the three areas, my favorite: history, psychology, and sociology. Because if we understand these three areas, we understand ourselves and each other. And none of these wars will happen, ever. But hey. So his scholarship encompasses modern Japanese and Korean cultural history, transnational popular culture, public memory, colonialism, and nationalism. He's considered a pioneer in new jazz style.